Welcome to the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast from Never Too Late Cafe. I'm your host, Laura Womack. Each week, we sit down for a chat with someone just like you, someone who had an idea, a passion, a dream, or sometimes just a thought, and planted that seed, watched it grow into something they wanted to share with the world. If you have an idea for a topic or someone that would be a guest for the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, where you can join our Never Too Late Cafe Facebook group. We'd love to hear from you. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Connie Springer. Hi, Connie.
Hi.
So tell me where you're currently living.
I'm living in Cincinnati.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Correct.
And is that where you're from originally?
No, I grew up in New Jersey, in a small suburb of New York.
Oh.
The town is Verona.
Oh, so that's why you don't sound like Southern Ohio.
Right.
Jersey has a little sort of a New York sound.
Yes, that's true.
So how did you end up from there to here?
Well, I took a circuitous route. I've lived in quite a few places. I went to college first in Washington at GW, and then I transferred to Oberlin in Northern Ohio. And I mean, if I should state the places, then I moved to Chicago after college and worked there, and then lived in Denmark for about a year because I was going to say my parents were German refugees from World War II, and my mother had sisters who had fled to Denmark. So having grown up with no extended family, I was really interested in meeting some of my family. So I went to a program in Denmark called Scandinavian Seminar, and mostly took art classes. And after that, I came back to the United States and moved to Louisville because a close friend was living there. And I did, well, I don't know if you're going to ask me about what I did in each place, but then eventually I moved to Boston to go to photography school. Then I got married and moved to Providence, Rhode Island. And then it was so expensive in the East Coast. We wanted to find a more affordable and resourceful place. So we moved to Cincinnati. And here I've been for 38 years.
I know the East Coast well, and it is quite expensive.
Yes.
So I lived in a suburb of Boston for 20 some years.
Oh.
So, when I was close to retiring, I knew that wasn't a possibility there. So exactly like you.
Yeah.
So you started to say that you did different things in different places. Can
Yes.
you describe, because I know you're a talented, creative person. So let's just jump in. If it helps to do it geographically.
Yeah. Or chronologically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm an artist in watercolor and photography, and I also do writing. And let's see, when I first went to college, I took a lot of art classes. I really loved art, but then I felt like it wasn't so practical. When I transferred to Oberlin, I majored in sociology, thinking I would be more employable. And I did work as a social worker, and well, no, I'm jumping ahead. But anyway, the first place I lived after college was Chicago, where I worked for Encyclopedia Britannica, doing research editorial work. And so it was good, you know, like I always had sort of a general background, and that was a good fit for me. But and I took my first photography class in Chicago. But I wanted to, like, as I said, I wanted to get to know some relatives, some extended family who were in Denmark. And I spent a year in Denmark in a program called Scandinavian Seminar. And then when that ended, I came back to the United States, but I didn't want to live in New Jersey. I never felt really that comfortable with it. So my best friend was in Vista in Louisville. So I went out to visit her and stayed. And Louisville was great. I really liked it. It's
Mm.
very um, easy to live in and very interesting. So, but oh, and let's see, in Louisville, I started in an art therapy program, but because I thought that was the perfect mix, art and social services. But I decided I didn't want to be a primary therapist. That's what the training was. So I uh, eventually, let's see, what did I do on my page? Um, that's where I worked as a social worker. I, took the state test in Frankfurt and was a juvenile counselor for 2 years in Louisville. And I suffered a tragic loss, a car automobile crash, and I needed to start over. So I applied to photography school in Boston and moved there, and that was wonderful. It was like therapy. I got like an associate degree in photography and got various jobs after that. But I felt like I needed to be more practical. And so then I ended up going to library school. And I wanted to be a photo archivist. I wanted to, because I always loved photography. My parents were photographers avocationally, and they instilled a love of photography in me. And so I wanted to be a photo archivist because I love old photos too. And that's why I went to library school. It wasn't so easy to find a photo archivist job though. But so I worked in Worcester, Massachusetts as a gerontology librarian, and also in Boston at the Massachusetts Film Bureau. I helped organize their photo collection, and
That's
and
amazing.
yeah, and that's the point at which, oh, I had gotten married and we had moved to Providence because my husband and I worked in Worcester, and I also worked in Boston. I mean, I worked part-time in each place. And it just was a weird setup. We had to commute so much. And like, as I mentioned, the East Coast is very expensive. So we went to a few places looking to settle down somewhere else. But I knew about Cincinnati because I used to come to Cincinnati when I lived in Louisville, and I always called it the Paris of the Midwest. I'm not so sure I was right, but there were some lovely things like the art museum and Eden Park that I had been familiar with. So we moved here, and then things just year after year passed by. We adopted 3 kids in at different time periods, and we had bought a house, and I started getting involved in. Well, I worked at the public library for 5 years, but it was a pretty uncreative job, and I have to say that the thread that runs throughout my life is creativity, like you mentioned. And so after I left the library, I started doing freelance things. Like I was a photo organizer. I went into businesses and organized their photo collections. I had over 20 clients. And what else did I do? Oh, and I did freelance photography too. And this is my whole life story. About 14 years ago, I took a watercolor class. I had painted in oil before, but I had never dabbled in watercolor, and it was really great. And then I was asked to join a studio at the Essex Studios in Walnut Hills in Cincinnati. The studio is called the Art Circle, and it's about 14 artists, mostly doing watercolor, who get together to paint. And so I've done that for that number of years. And the Essex Studios also has art walks 3 times a year, and I participate in them. And I've had exhibits elsewhere too. I was always eager to find places for both the studio and me personally to exhibit. So there've been quite a few exhibits, including one in Louisville at the Unitarian Church there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had a solo show there called Painted Stories, and then I had the same show here in Cincinnati at another Unitarian church. But so
Well, from my understanding, they're very supportive of creative people, and I've been to several art shows at I don't know if there's more than one Unitarian church in
yeah.
Louisville, but
Oh, in Louisville? That I don't know. I know in Cincinnati there are about 3.
oh, okay.
But this is the one that Jill is connected with. So
Oh, okay, yes. So, and I think it's very interesting because I've recently started doing some, historical excavation and going through, maps and digitized photos and sometimes not finding as much as I'd like, and collections that aren't really as complete as I thought they would be. So I think it's fascinating that you did that sort of helping to organize, and because I know they're coded and all kinds of things and things that we don't think about when you go to search for them.
right. Yeah, it was very fulfilling. Because I usually confronted a mess and then I made order out of chaos.
And that has to be fulfilling.
Yeah, it is really.
Well, did you ever find yourself like getting really into, like, here you're supposed to catalog, but you're like getting interested in the history of this or that or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally speaking interested. I organize photos for a lot of the hospitals, and yeah, I mean, the material's always very interesting.
So, um, so
I worked for another. I mean, one of the clients was Verdon Bell Company, and that was a little challenging because they had basically bells and clocks. So I wouldn't say it was overly interesting, but I learned the language of the way the kinds of materials that they made, and it was enlightening.
sort of an inventory or
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
right.
Well, it's still a process, and it takes a lot to do that. So, had you um, been influenced? You said your parents were both photographers. Was there other art forms that you were like someone else influenced your art?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess I would say my parents always encouraged me to do art, and I took like in Montclair, New Jersey, I took art courses that they offered kids, and um, I that was going to be one of my answers to one of your questions. But I really believe in taking classes to to learn about the medium and help your work. And I would say basically every teacher I learned something,
Mm.
an influence.
So you start out in oils.
I was self-taught basically. Yeah, I just I worked doing canvases on my own. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, you must have some sort of talent, because I could pick up a canvas in oils and it's not necessarily going to be considered art. Maybe real abstract.
And I'm not good at abstract.
Well, uh, everyone seems to have that's an artist has well, sometimes not just one area, but
Yeah.
so then did you ever have shows with oils?
I don't think I did. No, I was more I would say amateurish at that point. I feel like since I've been here, I've tried to professionalize myself. I mean, I
Mm.
have a website, and uh,
So photographer, artist, what
oh,
about, and writer?
I'm glad you asked that because over the last 20 years, I'd say I did produce 2 books, which also were um, exhibits. And the one I'm the most proud of is called Positively 90 Interviews with Lively Nonagenarians, where I interviewed 28 people in their 90s and photographed them and synthesized their stories and self-published a book. And then that was very popular, and it appeared in 9 exhibits all over town and in Oxford also. Yeah, that was really good.
So you did what to the?
I interviewed them, and I really tried to synthesize. At the end of the book, I had a list of 20 traits of positive nonagenarians, and I
Oh,
amassed all the things that they had said, a lot of them in common. What about, what were the traits that made them so optimistic and, purposeful? And yeah, it was really great. It was inspiring to me as well as to other people. And the other book I did was, unfortunately, I did it as a date book just for 1 year, so it didn't have a long lasting life, but it was a book on adoptive families, since I'm part of one, and that was called Our Families: A Celebration of Adoption. And I interviewed maybe 15 adoptive families to show non-traditional ways of forming a family. And yeah, that was pretty good too.
oh, so it's not around now.
Well, I have extra copies if you ever want one. But the trouble was, it was tied to the year that it was a date book.
Oh, I
That
see.
was a mistake on my part. I thought it would be clever, but it had a brief life. But if you ever want one, I have extra copies.
Well, it's possible probably to revitalize it.
It's possible, although it's sort of ancient history now, because all the children
gone.
in the book have grown up, and it's a little out of date. But some of the, like, the quotes and the pictures, I mean, they have a classic appeal.
I would think that some of the characteristics of doing what you did as far as developing a family, non-traditional,
Yeah.
might be universal, but that's just a thought on my part.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Well, interesting. So,
But aside from that, I've written for publications like Hyde Park Living. I wrote for them for years, for at least 10 years. And that's a community magazine. I live in Hyde Park. It's a neighborhood. And
okay.
For the magazine, it was a monthly magazine. And then other places like Soapbox Cincinnati. It's an online magazine. I've written articles for them, and just here and there.
Very interesting. So, all right. Well, we talked about your influences and things, and it sounds like you've had this kind of creative thread throughout your whole life.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about you having the same teacher for all of those years.
Huh.
You must get something new all the time.
Well, his whole method is to kind of circle the room and give tips and comments to each student, so it's always ongoing, because you're always working on something new. And he does demos, and it's kind of a family of artists at this point, with him in the head.
That's amazing. So you're all doing your independent projects as well, and he's sort of
circling the room. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Except for when he does demos,
Right.
I mean, yeah.
So what a support. So you know where to get some fellow supporters as well.
Right. Yes.
Great.
A lot of times people in the class, we've gotten a little dependent on him. Like, we don't know at what point we're done, and until he gives us his blessing saying you're done. But I mean, some people take that more seriously than others, but
Wow. I think it's amazing that you've got this collective group.
yeah.
And and so that this podcast is called Bloom Where You're Planted, and that quote means something different to everyone. So what does it mean to you?
Well, I mean, I've lived a lot of places, but here I've lived the longest, half my life, really, 38 years. And it's the first time I have been really planted. I mean, I have all the trappings of being planted, like a house and kids and dogs in the past and artistic endeavors. And I I feel like I've taken advantage of opportunities here more than in other places in terms of art.
Hmm.
Um, I definitely have worked towards making artistic connections. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention is sometimes I do publicity for artists, which I really enjoy because, I like publicizing other artists. Actually, my husband is an artist too. He's a kaleidoscope maker. So I'm his main publicist, but but
I love kaleidoscopes my whole life.
I'll send you his website too.
Yes.
And yeah, I think connections are very important, in the art world. And
Hmm.
I feel like I've made quite a few. I used to work on publicizing the Essex studios anytime they had an art walk. That takes a lot of work and it's a team, but I usually handle a lot of the publicity. But
Hmm.
I've also left that work. It's time for the next, you know.
You pass the baton to somebody
Yeah,
else.
exactly.
Well, other people need to learn how to do things sometimes too.
No, well, it's the trouble is volunteerism is hard to exact from other people, like, but I think now there's a great group of volunteers. So
So then, you've
work,
done a lot of different things.
I have.
So would
Sure.
you have different words of wisdom for different categories of what you've done?
Well, I mean, certain things like I don't know, writing. I feel like I have a knack for that. I have a good vocabulary. I love writing. I like writing better than speaking. But so that I don't know so much what to advise, but for art, I do really feel like it's important to um, take classes and keep up with things and get good um, mentors and get in, colleagues. It's important to have a group and fun.
I would
So
think, as far as support as well, that you have definitely mastered that. So,
right. And when I went to photography school, that was in my late 20s in Boston. That was great too, because it was very collegial. I never know whether it's collegial or collegial, but it was a great group of people, and we learned, but we had fun. It was so I'm all for school. I mean, some people are great at being self-taught. That's great too if you can do it. But I like class.
hmm. Yeah, I've known of people that they didn't have classes, and I don't know if they would have benefited more, but everyone's different. So it's really
Absolutely.
hard to say.
Right.
And, but you feel like a lifelong learner.
Yes, I like that description. Thank you. Yeah. And that's one of the 20 positive, I mean, the traits of people in their 90s. Be a lifelong learner, always learn something. And it's so important. Yeah.
Exactly. So, well, I'm glad that we connected. I think it was over a premiere, and
Well, I love documentary films and are you the producer or director?
yes, yes, both.
Both. And
Yes.
I'd love to see that film.
Um,
Sometimes it,
and there's going to be a longer version. I call it uncut because we filmed for a long time, and I'm just going to cut out sort of the bloopers or whatever, and
yeah.
then produce the full thing. So, but
Well.
this isn't about me.
But I love to ask questions. That's my problem. I love to interview people, that's why I did these two book projects.
Well,
So,
that's an amazing thing as well. I mean, and then you do marketing for people, or you have that potential, and so so what's next is that you're
working in my home studio and continuing to look for opportunities. And um, oh, I forgot to mention one thing that was really flattering. There's a thing called Embracing Our Differences in Sarasota, Florida. It's a sort of a contest. It's been around, I think, for maybe 20 years, but I only started submitting in the last 8 years or so. And I've been selected 3 times, photographs. And it's quite impressive because, I mean, you can't imagine how many people enter this thing. It's like I've seen it listed at 16,000 entries, and they pick about 60 or 70, I believe. So yeah, they I submitted each time a black and white photo of it's one of my kids interacting with somebody. And yeah, so in January I'm going down to Sarasota. Oh, the great part is that they blow up the images billboard size, and it's shown outdoors at the Sarasota Bayfront Park, and it's just really neat. I went 2 years ago, and so yeah, I'm pretty proud of that too.
Billboard size.
Yeah, it's amazing because they look terrific. I mean, it's on some kind of material.
Right, to endure the outdoor,
But the
exactly.
whole point is to encourage diversity. And I mean, some of the people they select are kids and students, that
Mhm.
did artwork, but it's all ages. You could be any age. And they really are. It's wonderful because I think diversity is so important, appreciating diversity. It's really how I feel like I've been that way all my life. I mean, that's been my interest.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Same.
Yeah. So I mean, in that way, I feel like I love to enter contests because every once in a while you win. And there's another thing I had recently in there's a place called Syracuse Cultural Workers. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I haven't.
they produce they're also you know social, for the social good kind of place, and they produce calendars, peace calendars, and date books. And they have a date book on women artists. And I was in it before, but I hadn't succeeded in several years. But this, for 2024, I'm going to be in the date book. One of my paintings, they just feature women artists. So that was gratifying too.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I really love it when something like that happens.
Well, you've got photographs, you've got paintings, you've got writings, and and even finding contest. That in itself is, it's
Well, it takes some research, which is
yes.
maybe using library skills.
I was going to say, you could be a resource for that.
Yeah, well, that was my idea of being a publicist for artists, that I could look up art shows for people to submit to. I could present those things to people and then help them enter contests, because a lot of people are afraid to size their images, and the computers part of it.
Oh, have I heard that? They're talking, I've have a friend in New York that had talked about how difficult it was. She was just paralyzed with fear that
Yeah.
her things were going to be, if she were to go onto an online platform and something would be blown up that would be so
Too pixelated.
blurry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Pixelated.
At these places, they usually tell you what the parameters are, how many pixels and the size and everything.
But you have to know how to do that.
Yeah, which, I mean, I have an Apple computer, and it's not that hard to do, but yeah,
But you also know what you're doing.
mostly.
It sounds like. Well, Connie, it's been really great. And
So much. I appreciate your looking me up.
well, I know that we had connected about the film, and I so definitely keep you posted on the long version. So
Wonderful.
and so and actually I have some Cincinnati connections as well. So
Good.
Well, I'm gonna just as our time comes to a close, I'm just going to say that I hope that you will keep me posted on things. My mind is going through with things that you can possibly do with all of your skills. That's why there's a little, I'm thinking, oh, she can do this, she can do that. You're very diverse. So, and again, I appreciate your time, and
You so much.
hearing more about what you're doing. And it sounds like even now you're still evolving as you, and definitely include any information about your husband's kaleidoscopes. How interesting.
Yeah.
So as our time comes to a close, remember to keep creating, keep sharing, and keep supporting each other. And remember to bloom where you're planted. Bye for now.